Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile video. In this one, I'm going to tier list my entire arsenal of build guides. All of my build guides, including profit crafting guides and craft guides, gear guides, atlas guides, farming guides, currency making guides, and there's so many guides in there. It's the biggest guide hub that has ever existed in the history of Path of Exile. It's available in the descriptions down below. There's a couple of things I want to mention with each of these builds. I'm just going to dive right into it and take one build at a time and talk about it. So the first build is obviously an S tier build, and that is Absolution. The reason this is so good is because the build can be played with almost nothing, league starting with nothing, and actually using that to level with from level 12 and forward. Obviously, you use other abilities prior to that, which is kind of up to you which one you prefer. The Absolution kicks in one of the highest single target damage outputs that you can achieve in the game at the moment, and this is something that can become very, very popular when it comes to endgame bosses, especially with the uber bosses that is now going to be available in 3.18. Now, with this in mind, another thing to mention is that Absolution will actually be the to-go-to choice to level with for most witch builds. If you're using a minion build that is a witch, you are most likely going to level with Absolution throughout the campaign, or till you get that certain item that makes your build play, that's such as Dead Reckoning for Mage Skeletons, or Joffrey's Crest for the Holy Relic and stuff like that. So we normally level with Absolution all the way. Another note about Absolution is that in the descriptions below, you'll find a link to an entire playthrough where I take you from Act 1 to Act 10, the entire gameplay of that, and not rushing too fast. It's about 5 hours casually playing through with a build. You can actually use that video to play along during League launch. There is obviously a TLDR video linked in the description of that video, which is about 23 minutes, where I talk about the increments of leveling with Absolution from Act 1 up to Act 10 as well. So do check that out. It's definitely recommended for anyone who wants to play a summoner as a witch. The next build is, no surprise, it is a S tier build, being the Mage Skeletons. Now, Mage Skeletons is very likely, from my perspective and from my opinion, going to be more played this league than it was in 3.17, because many more people have now seen how strong and ridiculous this build actually is, and I think more people will therefore play it in 3.18. Now, with this in mind, like I mentioned before, the build will use Absolution when you're leveling till you can either drop or afford the Dead Reckoning Jewel, which is required to make this build work. So there's a small disclaimer on the league starting with a Mage Skelly build. However, the build itself kicks on and does endgame content, the regular pinnacle endgame bosses in a Mere Tabula or a 5-link Fleshcrafter. The gear progression for this is very, very smooth, but most importantly when it comes to this build guide is the fact that this build guide has a link in the descriptions down below as well, with a video for how you can progress the gear of that character step by step, what you should be looking for from going from the campaign into the low budget state of the build into a medium and in the higher budgets after that. So all of that is available through content linked in the descriptions below as well, so do check that out. I don't want to take too much time into this video, so I'm just going to jump into the next build, which is a collaboration with 10K. Do check his YouTube channel out. We made the written guide version of his build guide, which is an EA, it's an explosive arrow, ballista totem build. This is also what I would consider an S tier build. This build is similar to many other EA builds, going to require pretty much nothing. The only thing you want to push up early is obviously the attack speed for this build, and the main purpose of this is to basically require nothing as you're leveling, and require nothing in the mid-game and nothing in the end game, essentially. Most things can be very easily found or purchased for a very low amount of currency, making this a very solid league starter build. It's very tanky as well, and it does pretty decent damage as well as half-ass decent clearing. And there is a couple of variations. The one we have from 10K on the PoE Vault website is a Slayer version. That is the version that I would prefer to play if I did play the EA myself. And we have another S tier build next. This is a build that does require a little bit more to talk about when it comes to disclaimers, and I will cover them real quick for you guys in this video. That is my beloved Dark Pact build. Now, Dark Pact is a very niche playstyle. You have to summon your skeletons, because this is a self-cast skeleton approach to Dark Pact. So you summon your skeletons and then you cast your Dark Pact on them. And the good thing with this build is that you can actually level with this when you get access to Dark Pact, making it pretty smooth as you can level with the build you're supposed to play in the end game. The disclaimer, however, is obviously that the introduction level of the gear would make this build more of an A tier build, But the upgrades for this build is super cheap because of a lot of factors, which I'll cover real quick as well. Since the build upgrades are so cheap, it's very, very quick to make this build go from low budget into the higher end of low budget, at which point the build suddenly goes from a A-tier build into an S-tier build very, very quickly, which is why I place it in the S-tier category. So when I say that the upgrades are very cheap, it's because Dark Pact has similar gearing scaling as that of a minion build. And the reason for this is that we can take a wand, for example. A minion wand wants to have +1 spell skills and +1 minion skills, and then they want to have minion damage. The Dark Pact can use that as well. However, Dark Pact benefits equally from spell damage as it does from minion damage, and spell damage can actually roll with a higher numerical value. This means that since there are so few people actually playing Dark Pact, most of these great ones, even a +1 wand with spell damage, cost way less than a +1 wand with minion damage. Because the minion builds are so popular and so in demand, they are so much more expensive. So you can buy the cheaper variants for the Dark Pact, which essentially is vastly superior for the Dark Pact build. This allows you to purchase items that is extremely good for this build for almost nothing. I remember one league where I bought a wand for about 8 Exalteds that I would honestly consider mirror tier for this build. That's how crazy cheap these items normally are. I've never seen anyone mirror a wand for Dark Pact, but I've seen multiple of them in multiple leagues being sold for less than 10 Exalteds. It's just absolutely crazy when it comes to the scaling efficiency this build packs. So if you like that kind of playstyle, do check that build guide out. Moving over to the A-tier builds, I would want to start off with talking about the animate weapon. The disclaimer here is that it's of course a very niche playstyle. You will summon weapons on the ground through the use of Bladefall. Then you'll summon your animate weapon on these lingering blades that Bladefall leaves on the ground. This creates a bit of a resummoning process where you want to start off the map with most of your weapons out, if not all, and then as you're clearing and looting, you want to cast them a little here and there so you don't suddenly lose your entire army of minions, and that kind of creates a little bit of a nuisance or annoying playstyle, if you will. However, people seem to really hate on this, but then at the same time, they seem to love mage skeletons, which is already having the playstyle of summoning skeletons all the time, every now and then, basically every fucking pack. Whereas the animate weapon has the approach of doing this every now and then regularly, which is pretty cool, to be honest. So if you can get past that playstyle, I think animate weapon will be a very solid build for both clearing as well as single target endgame capabilities. Moving over to another A-tier build is a variation of animate weapon called Chains of Command. This unique chest piece prevents you from having access to non-animated minions. This means that you'll have your animate guardian, and as your animate guardian kills things, thanks to Grapevine, making sure that any kill within close proximity of him counts as his kill, he will summon a higher level animate weapon, or animate guardian's weapon, which is basically an animate weapon, but that weapon is the weapon that the animate guardian is wearing. And this build is actually really, really good, even on a low budget state, using something cheap as a White Wind, which normally costs about a chaos. You can also use a replica Oros, but they're not that easily or commonly accessible early on. The White Wind is actually better and cheaper in more cases. And the upgrade versions for this is actually a 4 White Triad, which can be quite expensive. However, the weapon upgrade, which should be the expensive part, is just in a serious disfavor, which is very, very cheap. But just keep this topic in within a low budget approach for my build guides. I'd say that the low budget Chains of Command is definitely an A-tier build. It packs a good punch, it's an occultist, it scales very well, and it clears thanks to Profane Bloom effectively. It's just all around a very comfortable build to play. I've used this build in the past. I've killed endgame bosses with it as well, with not too much currency invested. It just feels really comfortable to play. Moving over to the next build is what I think is going to be one of the meta builds during 3.18, which is Cold Snap Vortex. The Cold Snap Vortex can obviously replace the Cold Snap for something like Wintertide. It's a matter of personal preference. I like Cold Snap mostly because of Vol Cold Snap, because when you enable that, you just run through enemies and everything dies. One of the best parts with this build is that this is a CI build. The guide will teach you as a new or newer or casual player how to transition into becoming a Chaos Inoculation Energy Shield based character. So it's a really good introduction for that approach as well. The build itself is very tanky inherently, and it packs a good punch, and it's one of the builds I used to use back in the days to do new endgame bosses with. Not sure how that will feel in the current state of the game, but I know for a fact that this build will do very well in terms of generic clearing and league starting with. Next build in line is the Golems build. Obviously, you can do Stone Golems, but I'd say you need a bit more currency to do Stone Golems, because you're going to want to have cooldown reduction for your Stones to use their slam abilities more often. So I'll be talking mostly about carrying Golems in this version here. This is without a doubt an A-tier build, and the reason for this is very simple. It's creating a meat shield of armies in front of you. It's very comfortable to play. The upgrades are very cheap, mostly because the people will rather play Absolution or Mage Skeletons in the current state of the game. So not that many people are playing Golem builds, which makes the jewels for it rather cheap. So it's an easy game to get started with early on. It packs a good punch, has a good survivability. There are multiple different variations you can run with, such as conversion to elemental, going physical approach with brutality, or even impale. So there's different types you can play with this, and it's just really comfortable to play with. However, leveling, you want to run with Absolution, obviously, early on, till you get Clay Shapers, and then you can opt in your Golems. And the funny thing with this is, once you start using Golems, this doesn't mean that you have to remove your Absolution. You can still have the Absolution in this build as you're playing, and then later, when you get better and better gear for the Golems, then you can slowly transition out of the Absolution playstyle. The next build is another A-tier build, which is the Holy Relic. The Holy Relic is, in my opinion, one of the best efficiency per currency invested builds you can get in the entire game at a low budget. I managed to bring a build up with 2 Exaltus, I think it was 2.5x, I think I invested at most into it, to kill Cortex in a Tabula Rasa. So that's really comfortable. I had recently uploaded, just a day or 2 days ago, uploaded a video guide for Holy Relic. A written guide is coming up on the PoE Vault very soon. This Holy Relic build is very, very good, but again, it will use the Absolution for leveling. However, you can switch to Holy Relic as soon as you have access to the unique helmet Joffrey's Crest, which allows you to have 2 Holy Relic minions, and it's just really, really comfortable. Due to the defensive scaling of the build, it packs a good defensive layer, allowing you to basically be almost immortal, not entirely immortal, but almost, versus maps that don't have the modifier that reduces your block chance, with almost no currency invested whatsoever. I was sitting around face tanking things with a Tabula Rasa and a life recovery and block shield, which is the most expensive item for the low budget approach. I think you'd have to pay 50, 60, maybe even all the way up to 100 chaos, which would be the highest budget item for that build in the low budget state. So keep that in mind. Moving over, I will briefly mention Bladefall Blade Blast. I'm going to put this as an A tier. We don't have any footage for this just now because this is a build that I will be reworking. I think I can do it way better than the guy that I have up at the moment, so I'll be spending the next coming days fixing that build before it's going to get posted, but I will believe that it will land in an A tier, so I wanted that mentioned since I'm tier listing all of my build guides right now. So with that said, I just want to move over to the next set of tiers, which is the B tier builds. The first B tier build we have in the list is the Summon Raging Spirits. Now, you can level with Summon Raging Spirits. I would say that Absolution should pack a better punch and leveling speed for you early on, but SRS can be used when you're leveling early on, which makes the build feel comfortable to play the build you're supposed to play at a later stage of the game. And it's just really comfortable. It's a nostalgic build for a lot of us old school players. And SRS can go in a mirror tier version up to like 150 million shape per DPS, which is crazy. But again, to go back to only talking about this in a low budget state, the build can be clunky when it comes to clearing. That's why it's a B tier, not an A tier. However, with a little bit of investment, that clunkiness gets more and more smoothened out, if you will. So keep that in mind. The single target is pretty comfortable. The interaction with the Hydrosphere allows you to never need to remove the melee splash support gem, so that you still have good damage output with a Hydrosphere placed on the boss itself. This also allows for higher upgrades such as Divergent Melee Splash to actually get more damage out of the approach of never switching out the Melee Splash support gem from your SRS. And it's just really comfortable. There's a lot of venues you can take, and it packs a big army of minions to act as meat shields for you. You can do an offensive approach to it or a defensive approach. It's just a matter of what you prefer to play. The next build in the B tier list is Dominating Blow, which I think is going to be extremely enjoyable to play in 3.18 thanks to the Arch Nemesis modifiers being moved over to the core mod pool of rare and magic monsters. The problem with Dominating Blow is the same as it always has. You don't get magic or rare sentinels when you're hitting a unique enemy, such as face bosses or even the uber bosses. So Dominating Blow will still be very, very lackluster when it comes to endgame bossing. But for the sake of clearing and league starting, which basically means you're going through the campaign and then doing map completion, killing map bosses, in which most of the map bosses will have magic or rare sentinels with you into the map boss, will feel very, very good, and it's very tanky and it's really comfortable, and it doesn't require any specific gear to get this build up and running, which is why it's such a good league starter build. So definitely recommend that one if you think that you'd have fun with that. Death's Oath. The Death's Oath has a big disclaimer. I think Death's Oath is a very niche approach and build to play because of the fact that it kind of requires you to understand how the build works, and also requires some base currency because you need to get that 6 sockets on the Death's Oath. You need to color it, which can in many cases be better done through early map harvest color changes. And all of these requirements makes this not such a good thing to do as a league starter. We do have a guide out that a lot of people have been asking me to make this. And a big shout out to It's Joji for the funny video intro we did when I made the build guide for this. So thank you again, It's Joji. I hope you're still around, man. But yeah, I think Death Oath is a pretty cool build if that's something you'll enjoy to play. I will place this in a B tier, but I can't recommend this as a proper League starter unless you're very knowledgeable and experienced with League starting with such an approach to the game. Next up is another B tier build. It's the Ice Spear Freezing Pulse Totem build. This build can in some cases be a little bit squishy, which is why it's not an A tier. Damage wise, it feels very comfortable, but with recent changes with the removal of threshold jewels, you now have to do a gem swap with the GMP and removing the GMP to make sure that you have proper clearing coverage as well as proper single target. The build is using Freezing Pulse for clearing and Ice Spear for single target. And the idea with this build is to place totems at a distance away from the bosses or the target that you want to hit so that the Ice Spear enters their second form to therefore deal a significantly more damage versus bosses. It takes a couple of tries to get in to understand and see where this breaking point of distance is, and once you see that, it takes a few seconds for you to get adjusted to it and just play the build properly from there. It is a very comfortable build in terms of defense because it freezes and shatters the entire packs of enemies. However, before you get up to the point where you're doing consistent crits, it can feel a bit squishy with the Mind of a Matter approach, but definitely something to look into if that's something you want to play. Another totem build is actually the old school Forbidden Right totems. This build got completely gutted because it was absolutely disgustingly broken back in the days where we killed endgame bosses using a one-link soul mantle with Forbidden Right totems. Yes, it's been nerfed. Yes, it still works. It's not the best build in the world. That's why it's a B tier. It's a fun build to play, but it definitely packs a good punch. Hilarious amounts of damage, looks beautiful with all of these purple projectiles flying around and exploding and shotgunning enemies. It's just absolutely beautiful to play. I loved playing this build back in the days, and I still think it's really good to be there, which is why we placed it in a B tier list. Another B tier build is obviously the Pure Spectre builds. The Pure Spectre build is in a situation where Spectre AI has caused a lot of problems, and we're hoping we're going to see some reworks on Spectre behavior, but we still haven't seen that for several leagues. There's a couple of different choices with Spectres. The guide I have will be promoting the Slave Drivers. These are the best balance between decent clearing and proper endgame single target DPS. However, Slave Drivers can be a bit squishy. Other variations of this would be to use Primal Crush Claws, which is a Harvest Spectre. These Spectres will allow you to be in a position where they are really good for single target, but not so good for clearing. Other Spectres that is pretty well balanced and have a little bit better focus on clear over single target, as the Slave Drivers have, that would be Huri's Watch Spectres as well. So those are kind of the three to go-to Spectres that people use mostly nowadays in Pure Spectre builds. The problem with Pure Spectres, in my opinion, is that the efficiency on the lower end budget has been made worse with recent changes, and as soon as you start investing to the build, it gets rampantly very much better. This is why it's no longer an S tier build like back in the days with Syndicate Operatives, and it's now instead a B tier build. Another thing like BFBB that we talked about before is Soul Rest, which I would categorize as a B tier build, but again, I believe I can make my build guide much better than it is in the current state, so I don't want to talk about this too much or show any gameplay footage. Instead, I'll ask you to give me a couple of days to dig through the build guide and the POB and see where I can optimize that build to make it even better before we showcase it. I'm pretty sure it's going to land on a B tier in comparison to the other efficiencies that you can get from the other builds. So we're just going to move on to the C tier of builds. Now, the C tier is rather interesting because the C tier is in a position where I would say that the builds I'm going to talk about is two of them, and because of recent changes or not so recent changes, these builds are not very good. I will have them in the list, and the reason I still have these guides updated is because there are still people actually playing them, and I would not recommend playing them personally in the way they are, because I don't think that they're good enough in comparison to the other options these days. And the builds is Eye of Winter Minor, which we did a collaboration with Path of Math. This build is really good back in the days. Nowadays, not so much. This is mostly because of the impact of something with the interaction with the Hydrosphere, which is now on a 1 second cooldown. It's still comfortable to clear with, in my opinion, but when it comes to single target, it's just fallen off the face of the earth, and you would much rather play something like Seismic Trap or any other of those approaches, but there are still people who wants to play the Eye Winter Miner, so the build is in the list, and I will place it at a very low tier of a C tier. The other build is obviously Chaos Dot. The Chaos Dot can be made in different variations. The ones that I have is a combination of either running SSJ Contagion or running something with Bane as well as Soul Rend. So there's variations of those 4 skills. Now, this used to be one of the meta builds for a long time ago, However, it's kind of fallen off the face of the earth. Thanks to it being an occultist, it does very well in terms of clearing, thanks to Profane Bloom. However, again, the single target is so bad these days with these builds on a low budget end. I know you can bring these builds up to be very, very decent with a higher budget investment, but this video is talking about the build guides, which are exclusively focusing on low budget. So that's why the Chaos Dot builds will be in a C tier, and I can't really recommend it. But again, there are some people that wants to play them, so I'm keeping these guides updated for those select 3 people, I guess. We have 2 more tiers. The first tier is F tier, which essentially is, well, the F stands for fuck this build unless you really love the playstyle and are masochistic enough to make it work. That's essentially what the F stands for. The F build is Lich Queen. The Lich Queen build guide has been with us since 7 or 8 years back and has been updated every league ever since. It used to be the minion meta build, and the build is played with a combination of skeletons as well as specters, where the skeletons takes care of one part of your offense and the specters the other part. Mostly it is melee skeletons for single target and specters for clearing, in this case syndicate operatives. You could mix it to have specters being more for single target, such as primal crossclaws or other approaches, and using mage skeletons for clearing. The problem is that in today's state of Path of Exile, the approach is better to just focus hard on one of those minions rather than spreading the focus out like this. The build is a bit squishy because of the focus on 2 different aspects of minions, and it's not really that good anymore and hasn't been good for a while, which is why it's been such low tier. We have a lot of nostalgic people in my community that wants this build updated, so it's still there, but again, only play it if you really fucking love this build and you're masochistic enough to keep playing it. The last build, I will not show you any gameplay footage. It's a build that's called the Cold Slinger. This build is something I've updated for the same reason as the Lich Queen in the past, because people like playing Cold Slinger before they transition that build into something like a Cold Snap Vortex or Wintertide Vortex build. The build is just trash, and I will stop updating it from now on. And just, if it's not, I'm gonna kill this bullshit. That's the tier. Kill this bullshit tier. Anyways, that kind of sums up the listing and the tier listing of all build guides that I have access to. These are only my build guides. Like I mentioned before, I have guides for tons of other things. There's a bunch of links in the descriptions below, as well as links to my build guides that you can check all of these build guides out. Hope you enjoyed this little video. I will be uploading a video where I talk about the league starter builds for 3.18, which will obviously be very similar to 3.17, but I will be adding some more flavor to it and just basically do a quick video talking about it, so people don't miss out on the fact that nothing has actually changed. Hope you guys will stay tuned for that one. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Until next time, as always, stay safe and keep rocking.